On your Friday episode of Locked On Raptors, there's just 10 days to the draft lottery, which means we still have time to think about guys the Raptors could draft if they move into the top 4. Today, it's all about Ace Bailey, who seems very polarizing, though I don't quite agree that that's the case.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Friday, May the 2nd, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 11 years on various platforms. You can find all my work over on Blue Sky. You can find the show on Instagram, and you can join us the Locked On Raptors Discord server, the best place to come hang out, talk ball with me. It's lovely. You get to talk about the playoffs and fake trades that's popping off these days with Giannis talk everywhere. Come be part of our listener community. It's a lot of fun. And again, it's 100% free to join. Link in the description of the podcast if you want to become part of the Sicko Gang. Of course, you can go and subscribe, follow, rate, review all your favorite podcast apps and good stuff as well. It's much appreciated you do that. Today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And we're off and running here on your Friday edition of Locked On Raptors, where we're mostly going to talk about Ace Bailey, a fun, interesting, sometimes polarizing prospect who I actually think I have figured out maybe all right as much as you can figure out a draft prospect who's 19 years old. I think I've got a pretty good handle on what Ace Bailey could be in the NBA if everything turns up ace and the development track hits the way I think it can. We will get into that. We'll get into how he potentially fits with the Toronto Raptors and their plans and why I think would be sort of like the least disruptive player to the kind of roster and team build they currently have if the Raptors were to take him high. We'll get into that. Plus, to close things out, I got a mailbag question that spilled over from yesterday. Didn't quite get to it. It came in after the buzzer, and it's a good one. So we'll close out the week on that note. But let's get to Ace Bailey, the tail of the tape on Ace Bailey, the teammate of Dylan Harper, the projected number 2 pick at Rutgers this year on a not-so-good Rutgers team, despite having two guys who all season long have been projected to be top 5 picks. Ace, it's maybe a bit of a wider range, 3 to 8, 3 to 10, something like that on most mock drafts you look at. But either way, two very good prospects could not guide a not-so-good Rutgers team beyond those two guys to any kind of success. They missed a tournament. It was a little disappointing. But Ace Bailey, lots of like here. 6'10 wing out of Rutgers again, 17.6 points a game, 7.2 rebounds. He's a very good rebounder. 1.3 assists to 2 turnovers. That's not so good. 1 steal, 1.3 blocks, so 2.3 stocks a game. We'll get into the defense, a part of his game that I quite like and that I quite believe in. 53.6% true shooting. Not exactly what you want among the higher rated guys in this draft, on the lower end when it comes to overall efficiency. We'll get into some of the reasons why that might be the case. And again, I think team context is a big thing to consider here when you evaluate Ace Bailey, same as it was when we talked about Dylan Harper. But overall, I mean, Rutgers, they were passable, competent with Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper on the floor, and a total disaster without them. Even Ace Bailey had better on-off splits this year in terms of on-off differential than Dylan Harper did. You know, they still lost their minutes, I believe, when it was just Ace on the floor, but they, got absolutely trucked when he was out there. When he wasn't out there, that is, sorry. Like he was an effective player who made Rutgers more competent when he was out there, which is encouraging. His whole deal, the big ticket item in his game, the big interesting skill is he's a ridiculous shot maker and a pretty brazen shot taker. He takes some of the most absurd looks you could possibly conceive. It's a real no, yes situation. A lot of the times he rises up. But man, oh man, does the jump shot look pretty? And can he just get it off in all kinds of situations? He gets a ton of elevation on the jumper. He's 6'10". It's really tough to block it. He's got a nice high release. It just kind of goes up over the top of anyone who's defending him. And he gets a ton of separation too. When he's like his nice little fadeaway game, he can bump off a guy, turn around, gets tons of separation, get a nice arc on the shot, get it to go down. A lot of really interesting shot making chops with Ace Bailey. Even if the percentages weren't incredible, he was taking these tough shots against a defense that was totally loaded up against him in a bad spacing environment. There's some reasons why you might project a little bit more success for Ace Bailey on an NBA floor in a lessened burden of an offensive role and with just proper spacing and again, working as a fourth or fifth option as opposed to a number 1 or 2 like he did for Rutgers this year. The shot selection is crazy. Like, probably if you're a coach, you watch him and you like scratch your head and you're like, why are you doing this, Ace? He does it because he can make them in a lot of the cases, and it's really intriguing when they go down. He'll have hot and cold stretches, very much like the Gunner's spirit is deep within this one for sure. A thing we talk about here on the show a lot, and there's some other stuff that needs to be it's kind of you wish was a little bit more refined as well. The handle leaves a lot to be desired. It's not super clean. He turns the ball over a lot. Again, 1.3 assists to 2 turnovers this year. That's not what you want. And we'll get into why that could be a hindrance to his potential fit with the Raptors and the way they want to play offense. But yeah, it's just like he doesn't get to the rim very much. He's kind of like a big version of Trey Johnson out of Texas, who we've talked about. 6'6" guard, also has trouble getting to the rim, also a pretty ridiculous shot maker. They're probably the 2 best shot makers in this draft, I would argue, and very similar sort of formulas for how they get to their looks. Maybe Johnson's handle's a little tighter because he's closer to the ground. He's more guard coded, but very similar in terms of guys who can't get to the rim a ton. And because they're such good shot makers, when they pull up from mid-range or from 3, they can kind of get by. I also think Ace Bailey's got a lot to offer as an off-ball shooter as well. Shot 39% on catch and shoots this year. I think there's a lot of movement shooting potential there with him as well. I think, you could totally weaponize him in a lot of, say, the baseline out of bounds plays, the sideline inbound plays that the Raptors run, where, it's a lot of times getting Grady Dick or Jacoby Walter open for a look. I think you could totally plop Ace Bailey into those situations and feel pretty good. I think the movement shooting upside is pretty fascinating. Shot 34.6% from deep this season, which isn't a great number, but I think a lot like Jacoby Walter as a freshman at Baylor last year, I think the percentage is mostly a function of, he just, you're in a difficult situation, right? The no one really cares about the other guys on the floor outside of Dylan Harper. Defenses are loading up. You're seeing help all over the place. And the looks you're getting, like the gravity you have as one of the most important players on this team by far, you're just going to draw more attention. Your looks are going to be more difficult. They're going to be harder to come by as well. He takes a lot of shots off balance, on the move, things like that. You would think in the NBA, it would be a little bit of an easier shot diet where there's all this other attention on the floor being paid to other guys. And maybe Ace can kind of get his looks off a little bit cleaner, which we saw. Jacoby Walter this year, very similarly. He started off poorly from deep, but in his last 42 games, he shot 50 or 39% from 3. That's really encouraging stuff. And I think Ace Bailey, the shooting touch is just so obviously there. I think he's going to be a good to very good 3-point shooter in the NBA if he can, again, pare down the number of totally absurd contested looks he takes. He's one of these guys who just seems to love to take contested shots, even more so than wide open shots. Just like, is he trying to prove a point? I don't know. But again, the Gunner's spirit very much alive and well in Ace Bailey. He's someone who, again, he's very polarizing. There's it seems to be like a wide range of, hey, he's either going to be a star or he's going to kind of crash out. That kind of seems to be the read on him as a prospect. But it's because his defense is actually quite intriguing to me that I don't think that's the case with him at all for me. Like, I think instead of this wide range of outcomes with a super high ceiling and very low floor, I kind of view Ace Bailey as like kind of a down the middle, high floor, maybe not super high ceiling prospect who's just going to be a pretty effective player in the NBA. He's got to work out the turnover stuff. He needs to be better making decisions with the ball in his hands and all of that. But I think you combine size and 3-point shooting and defensive chops, like that's a good NBA player right there. That's value from someone who's 6'10", even if the star level stuff doesn't come along. And I don't think the star level stuff is going to come along. I think, to go from being a 1.3 assist to 2 turnovers guy to being like an on-ball creative force and offensive engine, that's just too much to ask. We ask too much of prospects sometimes and put too much upon them. I think Ace Bailey just has a chance of being like a damn good complementary role player who enhances and amplifies other guys, because when it comes to him, defenses are panicked. Defenses are not thrilled to be funneling shots to Ace Bailey as your 4th option, or at least that's kind of what I envision his future looking like. And because of that, when you factor that in with the defense, which I think when you look at his defense there's still stuff to iron out. He's not super strong. He's got to work on that. He's got to bulk up, as all these guys tend to have to do. But I think he, can switch onto guys on the perimeter. He can guard wings. He can stay in lockstep, dance with them, mirror feet, stuff like that. And I think the thing he's really going to excel at defensively is like backline rim protection stuff, similar to how Scotty Barnes succeeds. And I think the possibility of playing Bailey and Scotty Barnes in lineups together is fascinating. We'll get into that a little bit more coming up in a minute here. But yeah, I don't think he's going to be a star. I also don't see a world in which he's not a helpful NBA player. I think, again, the conversation is so polarized to kind of paint him as a boomer bust guy. But to me, it's more like it's not this crazy high ceiling. It's like you're in a third floor loft room with a low ceiling. Not dissimilar to the office I'm recording this show in right now. Not a super high ceiling. I'm on the third floor. Like, it's a pretty high floor. The ceiling's not crazy high. There's not a ton of room to kind of burst through it, but occupy a third floor loft with the guy you draft in the lottery. Like, that's a pretty good thing. Especially considering the skill sets are very much like playoff friendly. And I think that's got to be the thing you're always thinking about when you're drafting guys and trying to project them forward. Does he have stuff that can hang in the playoffs? Defense, 3-point shooting, and size, those things hang in the playoffs. We'll get into some of the downsides and why the offensive decision-making and stuff might not make him a perfect fit with the Raptors coming up here in just a second as we continue our Ace Bailey talk on the pod. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Monarch Money. And look, have you ever looked in your bank account and wondered where the hell did all my money go? I do this all the time because I have a bunch of different accounts for all of the different parts of my life. I am a freelancer. I have an American account, and I have a Canadian account, and I have a mortgage account with my wife, and all this stuff is going on. And between dining, online shopping, entertainment, whatever it is, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. I like to see where my money's going. I think I'm generally pretty good with my money, but sometimes I'll go on a binge where I'm like buying too many lunches or something like that. And all of a sudden I'm like, where did it all go? Well, if I had the command center going, I'd be able to keep track perfectly of where my money's going with Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDINNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDINNBA for half off your first year. Go check them out. Back at it here on Ace Bailey Friday. Again, we got a mailbag question coming up later on, a fun one about Masai Ujiri that will close things off with. But let's keep on talking Ace Bailey here and his fit with the Toronto Raptors. Again, I think he's a prospect who has a lot of things that are going to go for him at the NBA level. Again, when you get away from that Rutgers environment, you have to bake in the college context for a lot of these top prospects. It's very similar to what we had to do when we baked in the sort of G League Ignite factor with a lot of the guys who came out of that program over the last few years. It just wasn't great for optimizing guys or really showcasing guys because they weren't really playing super functional basketball. Rutgers didn't play terribly functional basketball this year outside of what Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey were able to provide. And so, again, you got to kind of try to figure out and parse like where the flaws of the player end and the context issues begin. It can be a little bit difficult to do that, of course. But let's get into how Ace would fit on the Toronto Raptors if they were, in fact, to pick him at 3 or 4 if they jump up in the lottery. And hey, he could be available when they pick at 7, 8, or 9. If you think those are the likely spots they end up, which they are, he could still totally be there. He could be this kind of guy who falls on draft night because of the boomer bust view on him. And if he's there at 7 or 8, I think you just got to take him. I think that'd be awesome. That's great value, I think. But with the Raptors, I mean, there's a few things. It's tough with him on offense because there's some stuff that I think would really work and some stuff that would work a little bit less, or you'd be more of a sort of, you got to figure this thing out type of thing. I think he could totally thrive as like a cutter and play finisher within the Darko system. I think he's a smart cutter. I think he knows where to stand, a very important trait for any young player. And I think he can sort of become a pretty awesome off-ball finisher. He can kind of creep baseline. He can, obviously, I talked about the movement shooting stuff. I think you can run him around screens and have him fly off and shoot off of those. Maybe there's some world where you can kind of run him in RJ Barrett's type sets where you run him off a screen and he can use that head of steam to get downhill with his handle, but the handle again needs to come a long way. That's where the concern for me comes in when you think about him within Darko's offense. Like the cutting and the shooting totally makes sense. The decision making, the playmaking, the turnover proneness, that is where you start to wonder, can that really fit within Darko's system where everyone is encouraged to make decisions as soon as you get the ball? Half a second, you got to do something. Shoot, pass, dribble, whatever it is. And again, I think the shoot thing, no problem. Like Ace Bailey, ball come to him, he'll happily shoot within half a second. No problem about that. The passing thing, the dribbling thing, those are the areas where he's going to have to really tighten things up in order to really thrive. And again, I think if you stick him off the ball and he's your fourth or fifth option, which he likely would be coming into a team with some established creators, maybe you're able to see more from him in those sort of secondary, tertiary creation opportunities where he's attacking a compromised defense as opposed to having two or three dudes stacked up and lining up for help against him like he had routinely when he played for Rutgers this year. If he's attacking a defense that's already been compromised by an advantage somewhere else, maybe there's room for that handle to do more damage. Maybe the passing becomes easier for him when he's not trying to feed it over two or three guys and skip it cross court to the weak side corner. That's a tough thing to do when you're just totally being sold out on by the opposing defense. That wouldn't be the case for him right away in the NBA, which I think could maybe be a reason why you could be optimistic and bullish on the playmaking stuff coming along. And those who watched him this year will say that as the season went along, he got more comfortable with the playmaking stuff. He was better with making his reads. Still nothing crazy in terms of overall numbers or production when it comes to assists. Still was a high turnover guy, but there was some progression, which is all you can ask for, right? Just slowly get better at stuff. And eventually maybe you get to a point where it's passable and functional and can work within what the Raptors want to do on offense. The fit to me is even more interesting on defense with Ace Bailey. Look, size and shooting is always you're happy to have that on offense, but on defense, I think, you can always use two-way dudes who are large, and he's 6'10". Curious to see how his wingspan measures out of the combine. You can't really get a firm handle on what his wingspan is, but for a team that's very 6'5" tilted, a 6'10" guy who can go between the 3 and the 4 positions would be a really nice addition to the Raptors mix. It would really help them elongate lineups, which is a thing I've talked about on the show a lot, is a thing they just haven't really been able to do with Scotty Barnes the last couple of years because they've been so heavy on guards and sort of middling sized twos and threes. I think Brandon Ingram helps with that quite a bit. And if you had a guy like Ace Bailey, I've been a big champion of we should be seeing a lot of Scotty Barnes at the 5 this coming season to really optimize some of the stuff he does in that role and to optimize spacing around him as well. You can get more shooting on the floor if Scotty's at the 5 and Jakob Poeltl's sitting. Not to say Yak's not going to play 28 to 30 minutes a game because he should, because he's good. But in those other minutes, I think Scotty at the 5 is a real viable option for this team. And I think it becomes even more viable if you have Ace Bailey at 6'10" at the 4, also kind of doing the things that Scotty does well when he's at the 4. The perimeter defense. I think he's probably even more advanced as a perimeter defender at this point in his career than Scotty Barnes was coming out of college. Scotty is a perimeter defender in college. He had the high hips. He was kind of slow to turn the corner, turn his hips, get his, stay in front of guys, kind of moving laterally. I think Ace has a little bit more of that just kind of naturally in him. He's a very fluid athlete. And then the rim protection stuff, he's probably not going to be the level of Scotty Barnes as a help side rim protector because Scotty Barnes is damn good at it. But if you can replicate that skill set while also having Scotty Barnes out there, then that's a pretty fun, interesting tandem at 6'10" and 6'9" between the two of them to play small ball basketball without being all that small, especially when you have the 6'8" Brandon Ingram in at the 3. I think Ingram, Bailey, Barnes as a 3-4-5 going forward, in small ball lineups, or as a 2-3-4 if you want to go jumbo and have Jakob Poeltl out there. Maybe you find yourself some kind of spacing big option in the future as well. Like that gets really interesting to me really quick. And I think Ace is just going to breathe a lot of shooting and space into a lot of lineups. We know Scotty Barnes plus shooting is always a good combination. I think that could really work. I think they could really have some fun with some jumbo lineups and some smaller lineups. Again, that versatility. I talked about this on yesterday's show. One of the mailbag questions that came in was, about the lessons we've learned from the playoffs this year. And I think stylistic diversity, different ways, different levers you can pull, different types of lineups you can roll out there is incredibly valuable. And a guy who's 6'10" and shoots the ball like Ace Bailey does and defends like he does or can. He's not a fully formed defender, I should be clear, and he's not going to be a good defender likely in year one because very few rookies are. But I think the tools are there. I think the smarts are there. And if he develops into that, I mean, that's just the type of guy who makes you so much more pliable in the ways you can play and the types of lineups you can throw out when things really matter. And you have to play the matchup game. And you got to turn the cranks and pull the levers. I do think, just to kind of go to the idea of like, should the Raptors even take Bailey if he's on the floor, on the board when they're up? Again, if they move into the top 3 or 4, I think it's a fascinating question. It's less of a fascinating question to me if they're 7, 8, or 9. Just take him if he's there, I think. He's probably the highest upside guy left at that point. But at 3 or 4, I think it's up for debate as far as, is he the highest upside guy? And I've talked a lot. I think upside needs to be the way the Raptors are going in this draft. I think because of what they stand to gain, if they can turn this pick into a star, you should be going for guys who have high-level star outcomes. And like I've talked about, I don't know if Ace Bailey kind of checks that box for me because of the playmaking stuff in particular. I don't see him ever being someone you're running your offense through. I think he's someone who's going to work more effectively away from the ball. A guy who comes up a lot as a comp for him is Michael Porter Jr. I think he's probably going to be a better defender than MPJ when all is said and done, when he reaches his peak. But the shot making talent, it's hard not to see those comparisons. A guy like Trey Murphy comes up a lot as well as a comp, which I love because Trey Murphy rules and has long been a guy I think would be amazing on this team. 6'10" dudes with just ridiculous shot making prowess. Like, yeah, very much I can see how people come up with that comp. Keandre at Hoop Intellect, again, one of my favorite draft resources. He threw out Rashard Lewis as a comparison for Ace Bailey, which, like, okay, you've sold me because Rashard Lewis is one of my all-time favorite role players in NBA history. So in on that. But do you want a Rashard Lewis, MPJ, Trey Murphy type with the 3rd or 4th overall pick? I think that's in the eye of the beholder. I think, that's a sure thing, good, effective, contributing, high-level rotation player who can play meaningful minutes for you when things matter most, if everything breaks right with the development and all the tools pay off. And so maybe that is worth it at 3 or 4. But with the Raptors, I do think the upside thing matters here because of, again, if they can land a star with this pick, things really change for how this team build goes forward. And it really, I think, just raises the ceiling of what they're going to be capable of. I have no problem if they end up just being like a perennial, fun, cool playoff team. If they're the new version of the Pacers, just a couple of years behind, that would be awesome. I'm totally down for that. You can use that position to parlay it into more down the line. But if you get a star in this draft, all of a sudden, those outcomes start to get a little more interesting as far as what this build can be capable of. And Ace Bailey, like I said, I think a lot of people view him as a guy who's going to be a star or he's going to be a bust. I don't quite see the star upside with him. And so if you're comparing him to like a Jeremiah Fears or Kaman Malawach, who I both think have higher overall upside, I know people don't like it when I say Malawach has crazy high upside because he too like needs to work on the passing and the finer points of the feel of the game and all of that stuff. But I'm betting on 7'2" with that mobility and the 7'6" wingspan and the unbelievable pick and roll finishing and the rumors and whispers that he's working on his 3-point shot. Like, if Malawach actually hits, again, the upside if that guy hits is unbelievably high. So I'm probably leaning more towards him or Jeremiah Fears than an Ace Bailey. VJ Edgecombe's also an interesting one, like a really interesting combo if they're 3 or 4. I think Edgecombe, I probably think is like a more sure thing chance to be a good rotation player. Bailey might have a smidge more upside, and it might skew Bailey just because of the size, frankly. It's interesting. 3 or 4, again, I wouldn't be upset if Ace Bailey's the pick. I also don't know if it would be the highest upside pick available to them, which you can quibble with, and I certainly might. We like to quibble on draft night. That's what we do draft night for. But yeah, I think, again, Masai loves himself a wing too, right? Like, he could totally be a Masai player, even if he's not your traditional, like, crazy, hyper, ridiculous athlete type with all these burgeoning tools. He's maybe like just a smidge below that super elite athlete tier. You see that when it comes to his finishing. He has a lot of trouble finishing through contact. Maybe that's just strength and being 19 years old, playing in the Big Ten. That could totally be it. But yeah, I think the fit is good for a lot of reasons, a little suspect for some. And I would not be upset if he's on the Raptors. I also think there are maybe other guys they look at upside-wise who fit the bill of what they kind of need or what they should be looking for a little bit more. Hard to say. But yeah, Ace Bailey, cool guy. Also, Ace Bailey, great name. Arius Bailey is his full name. That guy's going to be a successful basketball player. If you believe in nominative determinism, he's going to be really good at basketball. Also, there's another Ace Bailey in Toronto sports history. He's an old captain of the Maple Leafs back like 100 years ago. Maybe there's some synergy there. Maybe that's good vibes in the name thing. I don't know. Maybe he's meant to be a star on a Toronto sports team simply because his name is Ace Bailey. Either way, I dig him. He's cool. And I look forward to seeing him play in the NBA no matter where it is. He's going to be a fun, interesting player to watch his growth going forward. We're going to come back on the other side, close things out with a mailbag question, a fun one from our pal Duncan over in the Discord. We will get to that coming up in just 1 second. Wrapping things up here on your Friday edition of Locked On Raptors, talking mailbag spillover questions from yesterday. A question came in like just after I finished recording the show yesterday that I wanted to get into the podcast. And because it's Friday and because it's the off season and because I didn't quite have 3 segments worth of Ace Bailey takes, we now get to this mailbag question from Duncan in the Discord, who asks, if you could be the fly on the wall for one Masai Ujiri tough conversation over the years, which one would it be? A lot of contenders for this one. Masai Ujiri, man who has had tough convos with guys. Going all the way back to maybe even when he was hired. Remember when Masai Ujiri was hired and Brian Colangelo didn't get fired? He just got moved to like a consulting role and was still technically part of the front office. There's interesting, tough conversation. Number one, Masai's first chat with Brian Colangelo, if one took place in the Raptors head offices. Really interested to see. Would he be really mad that Brian Colangelo traded a first round pick in a year where his white whale, Giannis Antetokounmpo, was available? I don't know. That was also the pick that got the Raptors Kyle Lowry. So it's a fascinating one in hindsight to think about. Going from there, I know there were conversations Masai had with Kyle Lowry himself after his first year in Toronto. You can read about this, right? Where, it was kind of a put up or shut up type of conversation with Masai. I believe the quote is something along the lines of like, what kind of player do you want to be, Kyle? And obviously we know where Kyle Lowry took the answer to that question. The answer was, I want to be the best player in Toronto Raptors history that wins a championship, damn it. And that happened. And that's sweet. Maybe not controversial, maybe not one of those like, oh God, we got to hear that conversation, but that's an interesting one. Another one, this is not a tough conversation. More, I'm just fascinated to hear what the pitch would have been. Remember when the Raptors got a meeting with LaMarcus Aldridge in the summer of 2016 in free agency before he went to the Spurs? It was like pandemonium, or it might have been 2015. It was the year they signed DeMar Carroll, I believe. So yeah, 2015 was the summer. LaMarcus Aldridge is a free agent. He's the biggest free agent on the market. He's meeting with the Lakers and the Suns, and obviously ends up with the Spurs. And the Raptors got a meeting. Don't know what the hell came of that meeting. And there's never really any reporting on it and how the pitch went or anything like that. That's an interesting one to think about. Maybe it was as simple as, I don't really want to come to Toronto. I'm being nice and I'm going to the Spurs, but that's one. And then obviously, as you go deeper into the run where they lose more games and things get heavier, this is where all of the really interesting Masai Ujiri fly in the wall conversations happen. The conversation where he lets Dwayne Casey go after winning coach of the year, winning 59 games in 2017-18, reportedly losing his damn mind because the Raptors did not double team LeBron James in game 3 in Cleveland after the OG Anunoby game tying 3. And then we know what happened. LeBron goes up, has the insane banker from the left wing that goes down and wins the game for Cleveland at the buzzer. Absurd, ridiculous, one of the most ridiculous shots that's ever been taken in a playoff game. And the Raptors didn't double team him. They just let him get it off. It was also an insane feat of shot making. And so, if you force him into that shot and he makes it, is it a tip your cap thing? I don't know. But we know Masai Ujiri was not pleased about the strategy at the end of that game. And there's plenty of reporting of it there and kind of losing his mind at Dwayne Casey over that one. And we know Dwayne Casey got let go not long after. I can't decide whether I'd rather be in the room for the screaming match after not double teaming LeBron James or for the final decision to let him go. I think that's a really interesting one to think about. Letting go of Nick Nurse, that there's some tough conversations that were had there. Of course, we know the DeMar DeRozan thing at this point. That's probably not one I would put, because I feel like it's been documented quite a bit as to what was said between those guys. And obviously there was some hard feelings, and you hope those go away with time. And it seems like maybe they're starting to, between DeMar and the franchise and Masai and all of that. But yeah, that was a ghoulish move, if we're going to boil it down, from Masai to trade DeMar DeRozan for a guy who hadn't played the season prior. Obviously worked out pretty damn well for him. You know what I think is the answer? There are some other ones, Nick Nurse getting let go, Kyle Lowry and how they sort of found a way to part with him there. Maybe like the pitch to Fred VanVleet the summer he walked away. How did that all go down? How did it end up that Fred VanVleet was walking away when clearly the Raptors' main priority was to keep Fred that summer? That's an interesting one. But for me, I think maybe the most interesting one is the pitch to keep Kawhi in Toronto. What happened there? What did they say? Was there any convincing Kawhi? Was there any pitch to be made, or was Kawhi just kind of doing it, knowing he was going to the Clippers anyway, knowing, or one way, or that he was going to LA, whether it was the Lakers or the Clippers, both teams were in the mix. Was that a situation where like both sides were resigned and it was just like a formality, or was there like a genuine pitch from Masai? How impassioned did he get? How many times did he say we're going to win again in Toronto to Kawhi Leonard to try to keep him around? What kind of concessions were they going to make to keep Kawhi in Toronto? I don't think we've really gotten a full, dissection of how the pitch went from Masai and Bobby Webster to Kawhi to stay around. I mean, it's a compelling one, right? Hey, we just want a championship with you, man. You want to win more? Like, we probably win next year if you're on the team, or we're very much in the mix to go win it. I do think they win the bubble championship if Kawhi is on the team. That was a damn good team without Kawhi. They nearly beat the Celtics. I think they probably beat the Heat in that next round. If they have Kawhi in particular, like, yeah, I don't know, man. That is, that day was incredible. Helicopter watching the hotel where it seemed like they were going to be meeting and maybe they didn't meet. All of that, it was a blur. I got to know what Masai Ujiri was talking about that day when he got down in a room with Kawhi Leonard to talk, and just to kind of, and again, maybe this was just like Kawhi walks in and is like, "Don't worry, don't pitch me. I'm walking. There's no need to make the pitch. No need to pull out the PowerPoint presentation." But maybe there was something more there. Maybe they almost convinced him. I'd love to know. I'm fascinated to kind of, if there ever were to be a book on the Kawhi saga, which I'm sure there will be at some point. Hey, you want to pay me to write it? Please do, publishers out there. I would love to know how that conversation went and how close the Raptors might have been to convincing Kawhi Leonard to stay. And obviously, we've talked about this before, like the sort of fork in the road of, if they kept Kawhi, what does the franchise look like now? It's a really interesting question, considering the ups and downs of Kawhi's health, largely downs over the last few years. That was an aging team. Maybe they're in pretty dire straits. Who knows? Maybe it's best that he walked and they got their one championship, this sort of beautiful storybook title that is kind of untainted because the championship defense season was so incredible. Yeah, COVID cut it short and kind of made it weird, but that team was so damn enjoyable. They went down so nobly in the second round to the Celtics. Maybe it all worked out perfectly and everyone's happy and it's all fine, but it's always going to be an interesting what if Kawhi had stayed. And I guess that conversation between Masai and Kawhi is kind of the inflection point of that. Either way, a great question from Duncan to close out the show. And thank you all for listening to the show this week and for rocking with it. Of course, we're not going anywhere. More draft stuff next week, surely, with the lottery now just 10 days away. Extremely exciting times for anyone who likes lottery balls, which all of us should be rooting for them lottery balls and saying many prayers to the lottery ball gods between now and May the 12th. We'll have plenty of stuff next week, of course, fun little games, things like that. Looking ahead to the off season, as we have been doing for the last little bit here. Maybe some more Giannis noise comes out. We'll see. Either way, thank you for rocking with the show. We will talk to you again on Monday with another episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye. And he closed out the week on a high note.